So that little exercise shows you can know a lot about God just using natural reason, just like you can know a lot about an artist by looking at their work. There's a very great philosopher named St. Thomas Aquinas who was born in 1225, and he tried to prove God's existence. Now, I want to say two things about proving God's existence. Thing one, you can't really prove it like I can prove that my dog is in the backyard, because God is a little bit beyond those kinds of proofs. At the end of the day, the proofs show that it's really reasonable to believe that there is a God, that it makes sense, that it's consistent with our reason. Second thing I would say about trying to prove God's existence, we provide these proofs really for us to be able to answer objections to our faith. But at the end of the day, it seems to me running around trying to spend all of our energy proving God exists is a little insulting. It would be like me spending the day down in the office trying to convince Dan that my wife does exist. I think if my wife learned that I was doing that, she would be a little insulted. So with those two parameters in mind, let's take a look at some of the things Aquinas said. Now, he had 5 proofs. We're only going to talk about 2. The first proof that he offers is from efficient cause. Now, that's just kind of a fancy way of saying that everything that exists has a direct or efficient cause for where it came from. So there might be a lot of secondary causes, but there is that thing that is essential, or the new thing wouldn't exist. For example, if I'm talking about oak trees, I go out into my front yard and I look at the oak tree, and I could go back in time and say the efficient cause of that oak tree is a particular acorn. That acorn is the efficient cause of the oak tree. Well, where did that acorn come from? Well, that acorn came from a specific other oak tree. And as you go back in time, you continue to regress back looking at different efficient causes. And Aquinas says you can't go back forever. There has to be a first cause. Well, there's a problem scientifically. Namely, where did that first cause come from? What caused that first cause to be? And this is even if we allow for the Big Bang Theory and evolution and all that kind of stuff. So if you go back tracing efficient causes, you eventually get to, well, there was this massive stuff that banged, and we call that the Big Bang. To which Aquinas would ask, well, where did all of that stuff come from that banged? What was the cause of that stuff? And science will always have a hole in the explanation for existence. Aquinas says there has to be something that's at the beginning of this series of causes that wasn't caused by anything else. An uncaused cause. That thing, that being, we call God. And it has to be very different from us, because everything we know in the created universe has an efficient cause. And yet none of it could be unless there was something at the beginning of the chain that was uncaused by anything else. Hope that makes sense. The second proof from Thomas Aquinas that I want to talk about is really my favorite, and it's from design. To me, this one is a lot more intuitive. I think the first one that we talked about is intuitive, but sometimes the vocabulary can be a little tough. Aquinas' proof from design simply says this: the more complicated or complex a thing is, the more likely it was created by an intellect. Look at how complex the universe is. It almost demands the explanation that there is a God. Let me explain. Imagine that you're walking down the beach and you see a pile of sand sort of arbitrarily in a half circle, but kind of not. You might be able to attribute that sand, that formation of the sand, to the waves coming in. But you walk a little further down the beach and you see a very beautiful and complex sandcastle. I mean, it's got an outer wall and inner wall. There are turrets, there are doorways dug in, there's a little moat, there's a whole design to this sandcastle. And imagine that the person you're walking around with says, oh wow, look what the waves did. Well, you would look at that person and say they're insane or they're idiotic, because you know that that sandcastle is far too complex to have just happened naturally. Aquinas would say when you look at the complexity of the universe, it's really difficult to attribute that to randomness, because left to itself, nature tends to chaos. If you want proof, we could take the cameras into my kids' bedrooms And you'll see the chaos that can ensue. It's natural for nature to sort of tend toward chaos, and yet we see great complexity. My goodness, you turn on a video about the creation of the world or the Big Bang, or there was a show on the other night about life before birth, and you see the growth of the baby in the mother's womb. The complexity of that is astonishing, and Aquinas would say that that points to an intellect being behind it. Much like a watch. People would often use the example of a watch. If I found a watch out in the woods, I would know that some human being had been there, that some watchmaker was behind that watch. And the same is true for the complexity of the universe. It's too complex to have happened randomly.